Forged in Dathomir's green witchfire and tempered by a master who wore many faces, Darth Maul crossed the galaxy like a devastating crimson thunder. Across hidden temples and trembling thrones, one vow guided his fearless aim. Driven by a will that outlived every wound and refused every grave. Take a comfortable sit, dim the lights down, and get ready to drift into the galactic twilight. Dathomir lay on the outer rim's dark edge, a world of red stone, misted swamps, and dense valleys where rancors roamed and storms rolled across jagged plains. There the Nightsisters ruled by witchcraft and custom, and the Nightbrothers labored and fought. In 54 BBY, a Dathomirian Zabrak boy was born to the clan's matriarch, Mother Talzin. He would be known simply as Maul. From his first years, he lived under a creed that prized strength, obedience, and silence. The planet, the coven, and the harsh training of Nightbrothers shaped his first instincts toward endurance and control. Maul's body carried the signs of his people. A crown of short, sharp horns ringed his scalp. Black patterns cut across red skin in stark bands and points. To outsiders, they looked like a mask, but to the Nightbrothers, they marked belonging and will. The Zabrak physiology gave him notable stamina and pain tolerance. The Dathomirian culture gave him a fighter's poise. From these sources came a physique built for motion. Low center of gravity, quick hips, strong core, and a face that hid nothing of his intent. Mother Talzin stood at the center of that world. Tall, robed, pale, and severe, she led the coven with quiet certainty and called on green mist to bend spirit and flesh. Her power and ambition reached beyond Dathomir, drawing the eye of a Sith Lord who lived behind many faces. Long before the Clone Wars, Darth Sidious promised to make Talzin his right hand, then broke that promise and stole her son to raise as his own apprentice. This theft and the wound it left would echo through Maul's life and through the fortunes of Dathomir itself. Around 40 BBY, Sidious removed the child from Dathomir and began shaping him for a single purpose. Sidious operated within the Sith doctrine known as the Rule of Two. One master to embody power and one apprentice to crave it. In practice, this meant secrecy, pressure, and strict control. The master decided what the apprentice learned, what he feared, and what he believed about the future. Under this rule, Maul grew in the shadows, unknown to the Jedi Order and unseen by the Senate. He trained for war that only a few could sense was coming. The training was direct and cruel. Maul learned to set pain aside and to treat fatigue as an order to move faster. He drilled footwork and timing until attacks came like breath. He learned to track a quarry, to enter a space unseen, and to end fights before they began. When he trained with the Force, the lessons pointed always towards speed, balance, and precision rather than patience or empathy. His master rewarded results and punished hesitation. This built a mind that linked worth to victory and identity to obedience. In those years, he also constructed a weapon that matched his body. A double-bladed lightsaber, also known as saber staff. Two hilts joined end to end, built on designs found in Sidious's Sith holocron. With one blade, it worked as a standard saber. With both ignited, it became a rotating bar of threat that let him control distance and crowd multiple foes. Sidious gave him tools suited to a hidden hunter. First of all, the Sith Infiltrator, a stealth starship with folding wings and a cloaking device which had been built by Santhe Cianar's yards. Public credit pointed to Wraith Cianar, but its shadow lineage traced to Rugus Nome, the legendary Bith starship designer known secretly as Darth Tenebrous, master of Darth Plagueis, who in turn trained Sidious. It carried Maul without warning into and out of systems. In addition to that, he had probe droids which extended his reach across streets and dunes, and a skeletal Sith speeder which brought him over ground at speed when subtlety was more useful than firepower. These were extensions of the same idea. Appear without notice, strike without waste, and leave without a trace. As Maul aged into his 20s, Sidious kept him focused on a narrow field. The Jedi were enemies. Patience was a means, not a virtue. Survival only mattered if it served the plan. He did not learn to bargain in Senate halls or to command armies from a bridge. He learned to be a knife, to be sent where a knife could win. This also set a ceiling on his early worldview. He looked outward for targets, not upward for context. He measured success in clean eliminations, not in the movement of trade routes or votes. The master was the architect, the apprentice was the tool. Physically, he favored combinations that flowed through arcs rather than linear strikes, because the saber staff rewarded continuous motion. The horns and the tattooed mask marked him at a glance. But what defined him in combat was not appearance. It was the refusal to lose position. Every step kept the center line guarded and the exit open. Every feint pulled a response that fed the next cut. He learned to use the second blade not as a flourish, but as insurance, a way to reset the exchange on his terms. Psychologically, Maul's center hardened around a small set of beliefs. Pain was proof of progress. Mercy was failure in soft clothes. The Jedi's calm was a lie that hid fear of change and fear of truth. These beliefs were not original, but they were functional. They made him tireless. They made him simple to point and difficult to stop. They also left him brittle in places he could not see. Pride could creep in dressed as certainty. Anger could narrow options until only one path seemed possible. Sidious did not correct for these faults because they were useful. A weapon that believed in one path would push harder down it. By the early 30s BBY, his preparation matched the scale of his master's hidden timetable. The apprentice had a ship, a method, and a weapon. He had a mask the galaxy would remember and a name the galaxy did not yet know. He understood how to infiltrate, track, and strike under orders. He did not yet understand what it meant to build power of his own. That lesson would wait. For now, the mission profile was simple. Remove problems, test the Jedi. Stay unseen. In that window, he would choose a private trial, far from his master's eyes, to confirm what he already believed about himself. That choice would place him on a collision course with a young Padawan, and with the underworld currents that moved Jedi and criminals into the same rooms. In 33 BBY, Maul chose a private trial that sat outside his master's orders. A mid-rim crime boss named Zev Exrexis, head of the Exrexis cartel, had trapped a young Jedi Padawan, Eldricatus, and announced a secret auction aboard her orbital station above the moon of Drazgul. The event pulled in a cross-section of the underworld. Syndicates like Black Sun and the Pikes, smuggling crews, and freelance hunters, each seeing a living Jedi as leverage or trophy. Maul slipped into their crowd, not to buy, but to measure himself against a trained Jedi. Because Sidious had forbidden open conflict with the Order before the larger plan matured, Maul built cover. He hired a small team of bounty hunters, including Cad Bane and Aurra Sing, and used them as tools to reach the prize without exposing the Sith. The setup broke fast. A Mugan bidder named G. Kra won the lot, but Maul's crew ambushed the transfer, while Exrexus's hidden sabotage forced the escaped Datecraft to crash toward Drazgul. The crash scattered pursuers across the rough terrain, and for a short window, Maul and Eldra were forced into the same direction under fire, cutting down rivals who tried to claim her. When the field thinned and the terrain opened, Maul faced Eldra alone. She fought well for her stage of training, even pressing him for moments, but he ended the duel himself and kept the victory unreported. When he later destroyed Exrexus and her station to close the loop, he also smothered a dangerous rumor that a Sith had moved in the open years before Naboo. This kill fixed a belief in him that he was ready and kept Sidious's timetable intact. In 32 BBY, a separate problem formed far from Drazgul, deep in the lower levels of Coruscant. A Neimoidian insider named Hath Monchar tried to sell sensitive Federation plans, creating a leak that pointed toward the hand behind the coming crisis. The data brushed an information broker, Lorne Pavan, a bitter ex-temple clerk, who knew how to move through the city's shadows. That thread pulled two Jedi into the same space. Darsha Asant, a human Padawan nearing her trials, and her teacher, Anun Bondara, a Rushan Twi'lek master known for calm instruction and strict blade discipline. Their task began as a routine extraction of a Black Sun defector in the Crimson Corridor. It turned into a running fight through serviceways, transit lines, and gang territory once Maul came to erase the leak. Bondara died by deliberate sacrifice, detonating his own duel rather than let the hunter pass. And Asant bought time for the civilian in her care, giving her life to keep the knowledge from spreading. By the end, Maul had removed each witness or carrier, and the leak died with them. The city resumed its noise, and the Senate level above remained unaware that an unseen hand had just tightened a knot to protect a larger move. With the leak sealed, the wider plot stepped into daylight. That same year, the Trade Federation blockaded the mid-rim world of Naboo. The public dispute centered on the Senate's new taxation of trade routes to outlying systems. Behind the speeches, the Viceroy, Newt Gunray, took direction from Darth Sidious to escalate from blockade to occupation, betting that a legal veneer and a quick signature from the planet's sovereign would make the move untouchable. This was the lever Sidious needed. Civic harm would create political motion for his other face, Senator Palpatine, in chambers that rewarded order over process when a crisis felt urgent. The Jedi Council sent two envoys, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, to force a negotiation. The attempt failed at the first door. The Neimoidians tried to kill them, and the Jedi shifted to evacuation, helping Queen Amidala escape the occupation. From that moment, Maul had a clear task inside the plan. Find the Queen's party, test and fix the Jedi in place, and keep pressure until the political peace moved as intended in the Senate. The chase that followed set the shape of the final duel. The Jedi escort took Amidala to Coruscant, with an emergency stop on Tatooine for repairs, where Maul first tested Qui-Gon on open sand and mapped his timing. The trail then bent back to Naboo, and the defense of the planet split into 3 coordinated fronts to break the occupation. A Gungan field army drew the droid legions into open country as a diversion. a Naboo N-1 starfighter wing struck the orbiting control ship that coordinated all battle droids, and a palace team moved through Theed to capture the Viceroy. Maul reserved himself for the Jedi. He chose the ground. Theed's royal hangar and the plasma power complex linked to it because its long corridors, catwalks, and cycling ray shields favored pace, isolation, and control of angles. He pushed them through the blast doors out of the hangar and into the generator spaces where the environmental rhythm helped him split them. When the energy barriers pulsed on, Obi-Wan was cut off. Maul fought Qui-Gon in a narrow window without the apprentice present and broke through the older master's guard, killing him. When the barriers dropped, Obi-Wan reached the far platform alone and pressed in anger. Maul kept the center and forced the younger Jedi into danger over the reactor chasm. The fight's last sequence flipped in a heartbeat. Obi-Wan recovered from a hanging position, re-centered, and cut through Maul at the waist, sending him into the shaft. On the surface, the palace team captured Gunray, and above the planet, an N-1 starfighter destroyed the control ship, collapsing the droid armies in the field. The Republic saw a clean victory, and the first proof in a millennium that a Sith Lord had truly returned. The Order marked a death and a warning. Sidious took the political gain he had prepared. The galaxy believed the red and black warrior was gone. He was not. Under refuse on a forgotten world, the will that had carried him this far would begin to move again. Maul did not die in 32 BBY. The fall in Theed's power complex carried him through maintenance shafts and into waste flow bound for off-world disposal. Automated haulers ferried broken machinery and biological refuse away from Naboo. And somewhere along that chain, a sealed container took him alive but torn in half. When the container opened on Lotho Minor, an outer rim junk world used by tinkerers, smugglers, and scrap syndicates, Maul slid into a place that matched his state. Sharp-edged hills of scrap, poison pools and steam rising from vents that never cooled. There he learned a basic truth of the dark side as he had been taught it. Will could hold a body together when medicine and reason said it should end. His rage at Obi-Wan Kenobi fused with survival reflex until it felt like a single nerve. Life on Lotho Minor was not quiet. Scavenger crews picked the plains for parts, and stalkers moved between mounds of metal. Maul hid it first, then built. From cut plates, broken limbs, and drive shafts, he assembled a set of spider-like legs that let him move and hunt. The welds were crude, the balance uneven, and the angles wrong for speed, but they worked. The pain from the graft anchors never faded. The lack of sleep and the constant feedback from raw wiring rewired his mind. Over months and years, his words narrowed to fragments. His thoughts circled a single name. The saberstaff had been lost on Naboo, so he relied on primitive tools, traps, and the Force used like a claw. He ate what the planet gave, vermin, carcasses, and scraps left by other predators. The longer he endured, the more he resembled the world that contained him, functional, sharp, and angry. That anger kept him alive, but it bent his sense of time. Seasons of storms passed over Lotho Minor while the Republic shifted elsewhere. In the core, the Senate moved toward emergency powers. In the mid-rim and outer rim, separatist cells armed and spoke openly. None of this reached the junk valleys. Maul's world shrank to the next sound on the metal, the next small heat on the horizon, the next thought of Kenobi's face. He did not know there was a war ahead. He He only knew that the memory of a blue blade warmed the pain enough to stand again. Years later, on Dathomir, Mother Talzin felt a pull through the same bonds she had tried to deny when Sidious took her son. She had lost and remade much in the time since. The Nightsisters had walked the line between secrecy and survival for generations. During the war's first years, that line broke. Count Dooku sent General Grievous to crush the Coven, and the Valley of the Nightsisters burned. Talzin slipped the net, less in body than in will, and reached out through green ichor to the one tether that still held. Grievous's strike did more than scatter the Coven. It cost Mother Talzin her living body. From that day she endured as a being of green ichor, able to speak, to guide, and to work witchcraft, but no longer anchored in flesh. She showed savage Oprys a course: find his lost brother. Savage, already reshaped by Nightsister magic into a heavy, horn-crowned warrior with yellow eyes and enormous strength, accepted without question. He did not share Maul's exact skills or temperament. He carried loyalty like weight and pushed through obstacles with force. Savage crossed the lanes that Maul had forgotten. He followed a thread of Force sense and Talzin's visions through dull, low-traffic sectors where junk haulers and salvage tugs did quiet work. The trail brought his ship down into Lotho Miner's air, through clouds that tasted of rust. On the surface, he met an anaconda named Morley, a long, sinuous scavenger who knew how to stay alive by being useful. Morley understood that every creature on the planet either ate or was eaten, and he preferred the first state. He led Savage through canyons of stacked hulls and rings of broken droids until they reached a narrow cavern under a slope of scrap. There, in torchlight, a shape moved on too many thin legs, pulling itself toward them with the sharp patience of a trap. This was Maul, half machine, half memory. His words snapped and broke. He repeated Kenobi's name in fragments of the fight in Theed, as if the event were still happening in front of him. To a stranger, he looked like a dangerous ruin. To his brother, he looked like a duty. Savage lifted him as one would lift wreckage that still had a core worth saving, brought him aboard, and burned away from Lotho Minor before the planet could take him back again. They did not fly to a hospital. They flew home. Dathomir in the war years was scarred, but the Nightsisters' magic still worked where Talzin's will could reach. In a ritual chamber, under cold stone and masks and bowls of ink-black liquid, Talzin began the work. The goal was not simple healing. The work touched 3 layers at once: mind, body, and purpose. With green mist, she drew Maul's scattered thoughts back into a line. The noise of years calmed enough that he could hold a full idea without it breaking into sharpened pieces. She mapped the tangled wiring of his makeshift legs and then replaced them. Not with polished humanoid limbs, but with strong digitigrade cybernetics fitted to his frame, balanced for power and agility rather than crawling endurance. The pain muted to a signal he could use. The new joints gave him height and stride again. When he stood, he no longer swayed. Clarity brought hunger, and hunger took a name. Maul did not ask where the war stood or who led which fleet. He named only the wound, Kenobi. In that focus sat the pattern of his life to this point. He had been trained to see goals as single points and to drive toward them until they broke. Even with a wider galaxy at stake, revenge felt like order. Talzin did not push against this. She accepted that purpose as a structure he could live inside while other plans matured in her own mind. A son with a recovered will could bend the underworld to shape. A son with a visible and simple vow could also draw out old enemies. Either path would serve her against the masters who had taken him. While he rebuilt, Maul assembled a new blade. The double emitter suited his habits and reach. He chose a weight that matched the feel of his first weapon, then tuned the rotation and the ignition timing so that the second blade could arrive without warning. In the middle of an exchange, the process mattered as much as the product. Building the saber reaffirmed the link between his hands and his purpose. When he finished, the weapon did what his whole life had trained it to do: extend the body without slowing the mind. Training followed. The first sessions were simple. Footwork on stone, breath steadied against pain, balance recalibrated for the new center of gravity. Then the drills added speed and change of direction because the new legs wanted to leap and drive. He adjusted. The old economy returned. His mind, however, did not return to the narrow obedience of his years under Sidious. In the silence after each drill, a second thought braided itself into the first. Independence. He had survived without his master. He had returned without his master. Revenge against Kenobi would satisfy the wound, but it would not fill the space that the old chain to Sidious had occupied. He began to imagine control that did not answer to a hidden throne. Savage trained beside him, learning to move with a partner's path rather than only as a lone force. Their styles did not match. Savage hit like a ram, Maul like a blade. But the pair's work taught both of them a rhythm they would use later when numbers and angles mattered more than raw power. The sessions also revealed limits. Maul's sanity had been pulled together, but jagged edges remained. The memory of Lotho Minor still lived at the edge of his vision, ready to snap forward when a smell or a sound matched a filed pain. Talzin's magic had stitched the worst of it, not erased it. He learned to steady himself when those echoes rose, and he learned to aim the surge that followed them. By the end of this period, roughly 21 BBY, Maul stood as something new. He was not the silent blade that Sidious had hidden in the years before Naboo. He was not the spider-legged creature that Lotho Minor had tried to make permanent. He was a fighter with a vow, a planner with a taste for leverage, and a survivor who had learned that secrecy and patience could serve ambition as well as obedience had served survival. He had a brother who would follow him and a mother who would open doors that most of the galaxy did not even know existed. The first move would not be delicate. To test his body, his blade, and his new sense of purpose, he would step back into the galaxy with a single message for the Jedi who had cut him down, and for the underworld that measured strength in fear. Darth Maul had returned, and he was not working for another man's future anymore. The next strike would show the shape of that change and invite new partners who understood profit, terror, and timing. Maul's return became visible when he chose to make Obi-Wan Kenobi come to him rather than hunt again through backwater lanes. On the mid-rim world of Raydonia, he and Savage Opress killed a village to light a signal fire the Jedi could not ignore. The choice of target and method showed a new pattern. Before Naboo, he had been a hidden blade sent to remove obstacles. Now he used terror in the open to shape the field and force a specific opponent to move. Kenobi answered the call, left larger duties behind, and came alone. On approach, he was seized, beaten, and brought aboard the brothers' freighter as proof that Maul's wound from Theed had not cooled. A third force then entered the picture. Asajj Ventress, once Count Dooku's assassin and now a bounty hunter, tracked Savage for profit and survival. She slipped aboard, cut Kenobi free, and fought beside him in the narrow corridors. The pair could not hold the ground. Escape, not victory, was the goal. They launched an escape pod and fell away from the ship alive. Maul had not killed Kenobi, but the message carried: he was back, he was mobile, and he would choose the time and place. After revealing himself to the galaxy, Maul switched to raiding so he could build fear and a reputation from nothing. He and his brother, Savage Opress, attacked easy targets: lightly guarded cargo ships, remote supply depots, and small outposts. Each strike gave them fuel, food, weapons, and, most important, rumors that two relentless killers were moving from sector to sector. These raids drew them to Florum, a dry, rocky world in the Outer Rim, sparsely policed edge of a known space. Florum was the base of Hondo Ohnaka, a Weequay pirate chief who ran a practical outfit. He prized steady profit, safe hideouts, and predictable trade routes. And he had bargained with both the Jedi and the Separatists whenever it suited him. Maul saw a chance to turn Ohnaka's own crew into an advantage. Pirates were useful force multipliers because they already had ships, fighters, and local contacts, but they followed whoever paid and protected them. Maul offered credits, rank, and protection to any pirate willing to abandon Ohnaka, and he backed those offers with open threats. Enough of Ohnaka's men changed sides that the gang split into two camps. From that moment, Florum's main base stopped being a single, solid fortress under one leader and became a contested battleground with rival factions fighting inside the same walls. The Jedi responded with speed. Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived at Florum with Jedi Master Adi Gallia. Adi Gallia was a Thalothian member of the High Council, a measured fighter with clear judgment who had worked for years at the edge of conflict to keep it from widening. On Florum, she and Obi-Wan moved through rock canyons and crowded yards to reach the heart of the pirate base, where Maul and Savage stood with their new turncoats. The meeting broke into close quarters fighting. Savage Opress drove straight into Gallia with brutal weight and killed her. Obi-Wan countered with precision and cut off Savage's left arm, forcing the brothers to retreat under fire while Ohnaka rallied loyal pirates against the defectors. The encounter settled nothing in strategic terms. No fleet changed sides, and no world changed masters. But it mattered to Maul's next decisions. He had inflicted a wound on the Jedi and paid a cost in blood and credibility. Raw violence could draw attention and peel away opportunists, but it could not protect ground or hold a supply chain. If he wanted more than raids, he would need structure. Maul understood that random killings would not build lasting power. He needed other people's assets to work for him. That meant leverage, pressure that made groups obey, rather than trophies from single victories. Criminal syndicates already owned what he lacked: shipping lanes, the routes smugglers used, guards and soldiers, front companies, and access to ports and safe houses. If he could push each group the right way, through fear, money, or promises, he could make them line up under his control and give himself reach that no single crew could match. He started with 4 pillars: Death Watch, a Mandalorian splinter group led by Pre Vizsla, They wore Beskar armor, trained like soldiers, and wanted to overthrow Mandalore's pacifist government. They offered elite fighters and local legitimacy on Mandalorian worlds. Black Sun, a large crime syndicate run by Faline leaders. They kept a stronghold on Mustafar and commanded money, enforcers, and a culture that respected decisive leadership. The Pike Syndicate, spice traffickers based on Obadiah. They controlled key smuggling routes that connected places like Kessel to markets closer to the core, which meant steady income and wide movement across borders. The Hutt clan, a cartel centered on Nal Huta with reach into Tatooine and beyond. They had credits, territory, and long practice at bending local law so their fleets could operate with few questions asked. With Death Watch, Black Sun, the Pikes, and the Hutts now answering to him in varying degrees, Maul gave the alliance a name. The Shadow Collective. It was a working cartel of muscle, money, and roots held together by fear and profit. To matter, it had to become more than rumor. It had to turn into a map with real territory, steady revenue, controlled ports, and uniforms that marked who served whom. The way Maul approached these groups reflected what he had learned since Dathomir. He did not present himself only as a duelist who could win a duel. He presented a business case backed by fear. To Black Sun's fortress culture, he showed that refusal meant sudden leadership change. To the Pikes, he offered protection for their trade and a share in larger markets. To the Hutts, he offered a part in a plan big enough to keep their rivals off balance. To Death Watch, he offered a path to visible victory that would make their helmets welcome again in Sundari's plazas. In each room, he made himself at the center not through speech, but through momentum, showing that he could remove obstacles and pay out gains on a timeline that matched criminal patience. Fast. This kept him aligned with his own nature. He still moved like a blade, but he had learned to cut levers rather than only throats. Even while he built outward, Maul kept the personal line warm. Kenobi remained the true mark. After Florum, the Jedi understood that the brothers were not a passing threat. The High Council had lost a member, and the field had gained a commander who was not a general, yet acted like one. Maul used this attention to keep the Order reactive. Smaller raids and staged threats forced detachments to move where he wanted while he tended to talks and intimidation elsewhere. He made sure that rumor preceded him. A red and black Zabrak with a double-bladed weapon, a one-armed giant at his side, and a plan larger than thirst for revenge. Criminals respect velocity. He showed them what speed looked like when it wore purpose. Savage Opress adapted to his new role as an enforcer whose presence opened doors. The loss of his arm did not reduce his value. It reinforced the brothers' image as fighters who survived serious injuries and returned unchanged in will. Within their partnership, Maul kept the lead on timing and strategy. Savage acted as an amplifier of fear when an audience needed to see consequences up close. This division of labor mattered when they approached disciplined factions like Death Watch, where respect grew from proof rather than promises. Maul's ability to control a duel and to read an opponent's next step matched Pre Vizsla's code. Savage's raw power persuaded those who still doubted that the balance of force had shifted. By late 20 BBY, Maul's pattern had settled. First, apply a shock that made a target doubt its ground, an unexpected strike, a public killing, or a quiet removal of a leader. Second, step in with a structure, protection, profit sharing, and a place in something larger. Third, keep the Jedi pointed elsewhere with headline violence, while the real gains happened in rooms where robes rarely walked. This was not the Sith grand plan that Sidious had hidden behind procedures and votes, but it rhymed with it. Maul had taken one thread, secrecy plus decisive action, and woven it into a crime design that fit the war's fog. The test of this new approach would come with Mandalore. If he could bend syndicates to his will, he could stage a crisis that only Death Watch could solve, then use that victory to claim deeper control. Mandalore sat at a crossroad of culture and roots. It offered legitimacy through symbol as much as through geography. To rule it, Maul would need to defeat a champion, manipulate a pacifist government, and keep his own partners from turning on him the moment he showed his face on a throne. That required timing, patience, and a public display that would mean something to warriors who took oaths seriously. The shift from raider to architect was complete enough to attempt it. Maul had shown that he could hurt the Jedi without being caught, split a loud pirate king's house, and make syndicate chiefs listen to a plan that did not begin with their own names. He had also shown that he could walk away from incomplete victories if they fed a larger aim. The next steps would demand all of this at once. He would have to stage crime as theater, war as persuasion, and a duel as a transfer of law. What began with ash on Raydonia now moved toward plazas and public acclaim. The Shadow Collective would have to stop being an idea and become a map with borders, taxes, and uniforms. With his new alliances active, Maul turned the loose network into a working machine. Death Watch supplied armored shock troops and Mandalorian know-how. Black Sun brought cash and enforcers. The Pike Syndicate opened smuggling routes and steady spice income. The Hutt clan added far-reaching ports and political protection on worlds where bribes mattered more than laws. What changed now was coordination. Maul set shared objectives, synchronized timing across sectors, and made each group's strengths cover another's weakness. He did not ask for loyalty. He enforced compliance with swift examples that discouraged second thoughts. To secure that compliance, he visited each pillar in person and set terms, face to face. On Mustafar, Black Sun's leaders tried to negotiate from behind fortress doors and Faline pride. Maul cut past the posture with a display that left the surviving leadership aligned to him and eager to avoid another lesson. On Obadiah, the Pikes needed less convincing. They traded permission and muscle for a larger slice of traffic and protection from rivals. In Hutt space, resistance meant bruised pride and a brief fight in palace halls. In the end, the Hutts accepted a simple math. Better to take a cut in a bigger game than to fight a war they could not win. Each visit had a clear after-image. When Maul spoke of coordination, defiance cost bodies and compliance paid promptly. With the cartel willing to move on command, Maul picked a first major target that could turn criminal leverage into political power: Mandalore. The planet mattered for three reasons. First, it sat astride useful routes in the Outer Rim, which meant traffic, fees, and influence. Second, it carried cultural weight. Control of Mandalore signaled authority to warriors across the sector. Third, its current leadership, the new Mandalorians, a pacifist government seated in the domed capital, Sundari, rejected martial rule. That gap between warrior tradition and pacifist policy created a fault line he could split. Death Watch, The Mandalorian splinter group he had already courted wanted that split widened and had a plan they lacked the strength to execute alone. The plan required theater. Maul would stage a crime wave on Mandalore, using off-world syndicates from the collective, then have Death Watch save the population in public, earning popular support and the legal cover to replace the government. The pieces fit because each actor gained something concrete. Black Sun and the Pikes got paid to stage attacks and to be dramatically defeated on camera. Death Watch got crowds cheering their armor again. The Hutts provided logistics, moving men and materiel where Mandalorian customs inspections would not look too closely. Maul connected the scenes and timed the beats. The operation began with targeted shocks. Syndicate teams struck Sundari and outlying districts with kidnappings, bombings, and extortion runs, carefully calibrated to terrify but not flatten neighborhoods. They left markings and witnesses designed to be understood. Civilians saw off-world criminals beating local security and felt their pacifist leaders fail in real time. At prearranged moments, Pre-Vizsla's Death Watch arrived in jetpacks and blue-striped armor, driving the invaders out in choreographed clashes. Reporters and city feeds captured the rescues. Within days, Mandalorian public opinion flipped. The people who had been outlawed as extremists now looked like protectors who could restore order. With the crowd shifting, Maul executed the legal stroke that would convert praise into rule. Almec, a former Mandalorian prime minister once jailed for corruption, still carried bureaucratic skill and a network of loyalists inside the machinery of state. Maul arranged his release and returned him to the front of politics as a stabilizing figure who could give Death Watch a government face. The sitting leader, Duchess Satine Kryze, a lifelong pacifist, who had guided Mandalore away from cycles of clan violence, found herself isolated. Her security services discredited by staged failures, her public turned by gratitude to armored rescuers, and her own ministers pressured by fear. Almec seized the moment, denounced Satine's weakness, and stepped forward as prime minister under the protection of Death Watch. At the height of this transfer, Pre-Vizsla made a predictable move, believing that visibility and popular acclaim now put him in charge. He ordered Maul and Savage Opress arrested, intending to claim victory without owing a foreign power. Vizsla underestimated the tool Maul had prepared for exactly this scenario: Mandalorian tradition itself. On Mandalore, leadership of warrior clans could transfer by single combat under accepted custom. Maul invoked that right, challenged Vizsla publicly, and forced him onto a floor where banners and cameras could see the outcome. The duel that followed mattered beyond two fighters. Vizsla wore full Beskar armor, carried a shield, a jetpack, and multiple weapons, and wielded the Darksaber. The Darksaber was not just a blade. It was a black-bladed lightsaber created long ago by Tara Vizsla, the first Mandalorian inducted into the Jedi Order. Over generations, it had become a symbol of legitimacy. Whoever won it in combat could claim the right to lead Mandalore's warriors. Maul fought without armor, relying on speed, timing, and the ability to read rhythm. Vizsla used every tool in his kit: blaster, flamethrower, cables, jet-assisted strikes, forcing Maul to adjust across ranges and tempos. The fight ended with Maul disarming Vizsla, defeating him cleanly, and killing him in front of Death Watch. By the planet's own code, the Darksaber and the claim that came with it passed to Maul. tradition did the rest. Many Death Watch soldiers accepted Maul's victory because custom left them no ground to refuse. But not all Mandalorians bowed. Bo-Katan Kryze, Satini's sister and the leader of the elite Night Owls within Death Watch, rejected the idea that an off-worlder, much less a former Sith apprentice, could rule Mandalore by right. She and the warriors loyal to her fought through corridors, extracted key allies, and broke away from Sundari rather than follow a path she saw as a betrayal of Mandalorian identity. The schism hardened the new order. Maul had power, but it would require constant enforcement from that hour onward. With the Darksaber in hand and Almec as his puppet prime minister, Maul fixed 2 layers of control. The visible layer looked legal. A prime minister announcing emergency measures, security edicts, and arrests to protect the public. The hidden layer looked criminal. Black Sun officers placed in ports, Pike quartermasters and supply hubs, and Hutt intermediaries smoothing traffic and bribes. Mandalore's treasury and customs began to feed the Shadow Collective's accounts. Its shipyards and safe corridors gave the collective hard staging points. Its news feeds, now curated by Almec, told citizens that order had returned thanks to their new guardians. The theater had become a state. For Maul, the political victory served a personal design. Mandalore's prisons now held Duchess Satine, a woman Obi-Wan Kenobi cared about deeply. Maul understood that a hostage tied to Kenobi's heart would draw the Jedi across any distance, even if the Council hesitated. He set the pieces for a confrontation built to hurt Kenobi rather than merely beat him, because pain, not just defeat, was the lesson Maul had come to value since Theed. Yet the crown came with shadows he could not dismiss. A portion of Mandalore would never accept him. The Hutts would turn on him if the numbers changed. The Pikes and Black Sun respected his momentum more than his name. And above all, the Sith Master he had once served could not ignore a former apprentice raising banners and bending worlds. Maul had replaced helpless rage with structure and reach. But every new rung of power made him more visible to the one enemy he could not out-organize. Maul tightened his grip on Mandalore by turning Duchess Satine Kryze into bait. He had Prime Minister Almec announce order while his guards paraded Satine in chains through Sundari. The message was simple and public. If Obi-Wan Kenobi cared about her, he would come alone. The trap left no doubt about its purpose. It was designed to draw one Jedi into Maul's hands and make him suffer for Naboo. Obi-Wan answered. He infiltrated Sundari and looted Mandalorian armor, slipped into the prison block and freed Satine. Their escape lasted minutes. Patrols cut them off, and Maul's forces recaptured both. Maul separated his prisoner from the crowd and staged the scene in the throne room so that every angle favored humiliation over speed. Satine died by Maul's hand while Obi-Wan watched, a precise blow meant to break the man before the duel ever began. The act anchored Maul's rule in fear and sent a clear signal to the Jedi Council. Mandalore now belonged to a warlord who would set terms with blood, not negotiations. In the chaos that followed, Bo-Katan Kryze, Satine's sister and the leader of the Night Owls who had refused to accept Maul's claim, made her move. She cut through Maul's commandos, reached Obi-Wan, and got him to a Mandalorian gauntlet fighter. Explosions tore through the hangar as they launched under heavy fire. Bo-Katan sent the Jedi away because an off-worlder ruling Mandalore, by right of a duel, violated the code she lived by. even if some of her former comrades had submitted. With Obi-Wan gone, she stayed planetside to build resistance against Maul and Almec. The rescue did not save Mandalore. It did something else. It drew the attention of Darth Sidious. The Sith Master had allowed Maul's survival to play out at a distance, but a former apprentice wearing a crown and assembling a criminal empire threatened the larger Sith design. Sidious arrived over Sundari without ceremony, entered the palace, and found Maul and savage Opress ready to meet him. For the first time since Naboo, Maul stood before his old master not as a hidden blade, but as a rival with a throne. The duel that followed was fast and decisive. Sidious fought with 2 crimson blades and unreadable footwork, forcing the brothers to defend at 2 speeds at once. One against his sabers, another against his shocks of dark side power. Savage fell first. Sidious broke his center, struck cleanly, and ended him, removing Maul's strongest ally in a handful of exchanges. Maul fought on, throwing everything he had learned since Dathomir, since Lotho Minor, since Mandalore's coup. But the Master's pace never dipped. Sidious pinned him, disarmed him, and poured pain through him until the fight's meaning was clear. Maul might wear Mandalorian symbols, but the Sith ladder he once climbed had only one top rung. Sidious did not finish Maul. He spared him for reasons of his own and took him alive. This choice mattered. A dead rival ends a problem. A living one draws out deeper enemies, exposes networks, and can be used to hurt others who care. In the days that followed, Maul vanished into separatist custody, bound, transported, and held in a place chosen for its isolation and control, because Sidious had other uses for him that did not include mercy. The fallout on Mandalore was immediate. With Savage gone and Sidious establishing supremacy, Maul's regime kept its shape. A puppet prime minister at the lectern and syndicate officers in the ports, but its core had cracked. Bo-Katan expanded the underground resistance. The Jedi finally had proof of Maul's rule and Satine's murder, and the Shadow Collective's partners waited to see if the numbers still favored obedience. Maul had seized a planet to draw out a single enemy. He had succeeded, and in doing so, he had drawn out the only enemy he could not beat head-on. Sidious did not kill Maul, he turned him into bait. Separatist jailers moved Maul to the Spire, a high-security prison on Stygian Prime built to isolate valuable captives behind sensors, droid patrols, and narrow transit shafts. From Mandalore, Prime Minister Almec tasked Maul's most capable lieutenants, Gar Saxon and Rook Kast, leaders among the armored super commandos, to break him out. They struck fast, cut a corridor through the Spire's interior, and pulled Maul free exactly as Sidious intended. Because a freed son would reach for his mother and reveal where she could be caught. Maul regrouped on Zanbar, a hidden camp tucked among cliffs where his Mandalorians could land unseen and syndicate couriers could swap cargo without records. Within hours, the Separatists struck under a clear chain of command. General Grievous, a Kalish warlord rebuilt as a cyborg and serving as the supreme commander of the droid armies, led the assault, flooding the valley with battle droids and close-quarters shock teams. He attacked on orders from Count Dooku, the public face of the Separatist movement. Dooku was a former Jedi Master turned political leader of the Confederacy. In secret, he was Darth Tyrannus, apprentice to Darth Sidious. The objective was not to wipe the camp out, it was to apply pressure. A fighting withdrawal bled Maul's coalition and, by design, pushed him toward one response: call on Mother Talzin. Maul reached her through Nightsister magic. Talzin read the intent behind the assault and refused to appear in person. Instead, she gave specific instructions: abandon Zanbar, regroup on Ord Mantell, and set an ambush where Maul could choose the ground and the timing. Ord Mantell offered what Zanbar lacked: a strong black sun presence, with warehouses, dockside muscle, and cash for fast arming. There, Maul pulled his pieces together: Death Watch shock troops, Black Sun enforcers, pike gunners, and hired locals, and laid out a plan that aimed higher than survival. He would draw both Dooku and Grievous into one operation, then close the trap and take them alive. Reinforcements arrived that stamped the effort with Dathomir's mark. A transport of Nightbrothers under Brother Viscus, sent by Talzin to harden Maul's line and signaled that she was watching. The bait worked. Grievous committed droid legions. Dooku entered the battle space to direct the strike. When Maul sprung the ambush, the collective ground down the droids, punched through to the command element, and captured Count Dooku. Grievous escaped, cutting free of the encirclement to fight another day. The win was real, Dooku in chains proved it, but it carried a price. Word of a Sith entanglement on Ord Mantell leaked beyond criminal channels, drawing Jedi scrutiny and Sith retaliation toward Maul in equal measure. And a prisoner like Dooku could not be paraded through ordinary space, so Maul moved him to a place built for secrets: Vizsla Keep 09, a Death Watch outpost hidden in the rings of Felbos. The keep was one of Pre Vizsla's old caches, a fortress in miniature, wedged among ice and rock with landing slots that vanished against the ring debris. There, Maul held Dooku behind ray shields and dampers while he pressed toward an obvious conclusion. The Sith Lord who had once tried to kill him and later helped ruin the Nightsisters could be forced into a temporary alliance under pain and leverage. Dooku feigned cooperation to buy time, and both men understood the truth beneath the theater. Sidious would treat either of them as expendable if it served a higher step. Sidious did not leave events to drift. Grievous regrouped and counterattacked, blasting Vizsla Keep 09 and collapsing sections of the outpost. Amid evacuations, Maul extracted Dooku and shifted the board to a place that mattered more than any fortress: Dathomir itself, because Talzin's power was strongest there. On Dathomir, under stone and carved masks, Talzin took a risk that revealed her long game. She began a rite to draw Count Dooku's life and dark side current into herself, not to gain new power, but to rebuild the living body she had lost in Grievous's assault on Dathomir, trading the green ichor of her half-existence for true flesh. The move balanced two aims at once: saving a son who could not outrun Sidious forever, and erasing the rival apprentice whose existence confirmed that Talzin's clan would always be hunted while he lived. The ritual pulled the enemy it was meant to repel. Sidious and Grievous struck Dathomir in person, forcing a decisive confrontation in Talzin's own chamber. What followed was not a street fight, but clash of disciplines. Talzin's witchcraft surged in sheets of green flame and binding wards. Sidious answered with crackling lightning and ruthless pace. Dooku, freed from the right's grip, returned his own sizzling bolts to the storm. Maul tried to cut a path through Grievous to reach his mother, using Mandalorian commandos as screens and stepping stones. For moments, Talzin matched Sidious hold for hold, revealing how close she stood to his tear when anchored on her world. but numbers, design, and venue selection were Sidious's true weapons. He had brought an extra blade and chosen not to fight alone. The end came through the Separatist general's specialty, brutal timing in close quarters. As Talzin held Sidious at bay, Grievous broke through Maul's defense line and drove a lightsaber through Talzin's chest. The green light of her form shattered outward, and the Coven's last great matriarch fell in the place she had made strong. Talzin ordered Maul to live rather than to die beside her. Saxon and Cast dragged their leader clear under a covering barrage. Engines screamed in the Dathomir night, and Maul escaped again, this time without the only ally who had loved him for himself, rather than for what he could do. The strategic consequences were immediate. With Talzin gone, the Nightsister line ended as an active counterweight to the Sith, and Maul lost the one figure who could knit his mind and body back together when they frayed. The Shadow Collective survived in pieces, but the aura that had bound it, Maul's momentum plus Talzin's unseen reach, thinned. Black Sun and the Pikes counted ships and credits and chose caution. The Hutts watched from the edge with their usual calculus. Death Watch followed because their leaders had pledged, and because the Darksaber still sat at Maul's hip. The Sith had not destroyed Maul's network, but they had removed its spine. From that day, every ally knew the risk of standing too close to him when Sidious chose to make a point. For Maul, the loss carried a private shift. Revenge against Kenobi still burned, but a larger target had taken shape. The master who engineered traps from prison cells to ritual chambers had to be answered with structure, not single duels. To survive Sidious, Maul would need open battles that drew in other orders and flags, fights large enough to hide his moves inside them. The galaxy offered such a stage almost at once. On Mandalore, resistance had grown under Bo-Katan. In the Republic, a commander and a former Padawan were about to converge on Sundari with a legal mandate and a legion. The lines that began at the Spire and ended over Dathomir pointed there. The next clash would test whether Maul could use a war he did not start to keep breathing, and whether his pattern of narrow vows could survive contact with a broader fate. By 19 BBY, Mandalore had become Maul's strongest stage and his most vulnerable point. He read currents in the Force and saw a single thread. His former master was moving to replace Count Dooku with a new, more dangerous apprentice. That apprentice was Anakin Skywalker. Maul decided to spring a trap in Sundari to draw Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi at the same time, cut them from the board, and deny Darth Sidious the future he wanted. Instead of Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano arrived. She had been Anakin's Padawan years earlier. She had left the Jedi Order on principle and now returned as a civilian advisor to help Bo-Katan Kryze remove Maul. The Republic recognized Mandalore's crisis without formally invading by giving command to Captain Rex and the 332nd Company, clones who wore orange helms patterned after Ahsoka's face markings to show loyalty to their field leader. This arrangement mattered. It kept politics tidy while still bringing a legion and gunships into Sundari's skies. Maul felt the change the moment Ahsoka sat down. He altered the trap rather than abandon it. His Mandalorian super commandos lured clone squads into the city's underworks and seized a high-value prisoner to read the enemy's mind. Under torture and force probes, he learned what he needed. Kenobi was leaving for Utapau to engage General Grievous, and Skywalker had been recalled to Coruscant to counsel Chancellor Palpatine. Maul understood two things at once. First, the pieces he wanted were not coming, Second, the moment he had feared was here. Skywalker's proximity to Sidious meant the final turn of the Sith plan had begun. He moved to break the line anyway. In Sundari's throne room, he offered Ahsoka a bargain. Join him long enough to stop Sidious's rise. He did not hide the cost. He named Skywalker as the plan's successor and proposed to strike first. Ahsoka stood firm. She would not accept a partnership with a man who had murdered innocents and ruled by fear, even if his warning about the larger danger rang true. The refusal fixed their roles and cleared the room of doubt. The duel that followed cut across Sundari's central dome, narrow bridges, great empty air, and glass that framed the city below. Maul fought with reach, timing, and pressure, trying to force Ahsoka into a mistake before clone reinforcements could stabilize the field. Ahsoka read his rhythm, absorbed the pace, and used the environment against him. She routed him onto a maintenance girder high over the plaza, broke his balance, and pinned him long enough for Mandalorian restraints to close. The device was ancient in origin. A Mandalorian sarcophagus built to contain a Force user with layered locks and arcane seals. Maul's capture ended the battle tactically. Bo-Katan secured the palace. Rex took charge of the streets. Ahsoka prepared the prisoner for transfer to the Republic fleet. The handover placed all of them aboard a Republic Star destroyer for return to Coruscant. What none of them knew was that an order had been planted years earlier inside every clone's mind. Each soldier carried a control implant, an inhibitor chip, programmed with contingency directives. When Chancellor Palpatine transmitted Order 66, the final step of the glorious Sith grand plan to overcome the Jedi and take control of the whole galaxy, the chips fired, rewriting loyalty in a heartbeat. The Jedi were labeled traitors to be executed on sight. Ahsoka felt a shock in the Force at the same time. Anakin's fall into darkness. And then the guns turned on her. Captain Rex drew his blasters with the rest, but he fought the conditioning long enough to drop a clue. In a whisper, strained to breaking, he pointed her to a buried case tied to a clone called Fives, whose earlier death had been the first sign that something was wrong with the chips. Ahsoka forced a pause, stunned Rex, and dragged him to a medbay. With a surgical droid and the evidence Fives had left, she removed the chip and restored Rex's mind. Around them, the warship locked down corridors, flooded hangars with troopers, and shifted to interdict anything that moved. They now had two problems: hundreds of brothers trying to kill them, and a prisoner who could tear the ship apart with a thought. Ahsoka made a hard call. She freed Maul and told him nothing except that she needed a diversion. He obliged with enthusiasm. With empty hands, he ripped through bulkheads, crushed power relays, and destroyed the Star Destroyer's hyperdrive cores, dropping the ship out of hyperspace into a fatal descent. He took a shuttle for himself and vanished into the dark, leaving chaos to bloom behind him. Ahsoka and Rex fought deck by deck toward a hangar, refusing to kill their own soldiers, even as the last loyal bonds broke under the chip's command. The end was a blur of falling hull and tearing metal. The starship, mortally wounded from within, burned through the sky of a barren moon and shattered on impact. Ahsoka and Rex made it off the wreck in a Y-wing pulled from the fire seconds before the hangar collapsed. In the silence that followed, they buried the clones they could find, set grave markers from scavenged armor, and walked away under a sky that did not care who had lived or died. Ahsoka left one of her lightsabers at the graves, a final act to misdirect hunters and to mark the end of her time as a general in a war that had just been turned inside out. For Maul, the crash offered something he had not felt since Lotho Minor: a clean slate. The Republic fell in days, the Galactic Empire rose in its place, and public law now belonged to Sidious completely. The overt network Maul had built as a warlord could not survive in that light. He needed a design that lived in shadows, traded in favors, and could be denied if the Empire ever looked too closely. That design already had a name. During the fighting on Mandalore, Maul had quietly told his underworld contacts to go to ground. One of them was Dryden Voss, a polished, near-human enforcer who handled money, taste, and introductions for a new syndicate. Maul shaped his surviving assets, roots, caches, enforcers, and debtors, into a slimmer, deniable organization and called it Crimson Dawn. The syndicate did not fly banners or hold planets. It brokered deals, moved high-value contraband, and bought influence in city towers where uniforms did not reach. Its public faces were elegant and forgettable. Its true seat sat with Maul, far from courts and scanners. In this form, he could breathe. The Shadow Collective had been a coalition loud enough to draw armies. Crimson Dawn was a blade slipped under a table. Through intermediaries like Dryden Voss, Maul rebuilt cash flow, retook safe houses, and placed quiet agents in auction halls, guilds, and port authorities. He stopped trying to look like a ruler and started acting like a broker who always knew a faster way to the thing you wanted. Even so, the pattern inside him did not change. Kenobi remained a fixed point. Sidious remained the horizon. Crimson Dawn gave Maul freedom of movement and reach, but it also required patience, contracts instead of battles, leverage instead of raids. He accepted the cost because it let him survive the first sweep of the Empire's purges and keep his hands on the threads that mattered: money, secrets, and the location of anyone he might need to hurt later. The stage now shifted from open war to quiet empire. Ahsoka disappeared into the chaos to save who she could in other corners of the galaxy. The clones took new names and new orders under Imperial officers. Maul's name slid off the front pages and into whispers at private tables. From that murmur, he prepared the next act, to use Crimson Dawn as a net that could catch a different kind of prey. Young Force sensitives, desperate smugglers, ambitious lieutenants, until a path appeared that led him back to the two lives that framed his own. Years after the rise of the Empire, Maul went to Malachor, a dead world scarred by an ancient battle between Jedi and Sith. He believed that there he could find the knowledge he needed. On the planet, his path crossed a young rebel named Ezra Bridger, a Force sensitive from Lothal, and his mentor Kanan Jarrus, a surviving Jedi Knight. Their hunt for lost knowledge drew them to Malachor too. At the heart of Malachor stood a Sith temple built around a superweapon powered by a giant kyber crystal. In past ages, activating it had petrified combatants where they stood, turning a battlefield into a stone grave. The temple's knowledge was sealed in a Sith holocron, and rumor said that placing it in the obelisk atop the structure could awaken the weapon again. Maul presented himself to the two rebels as an old master, a mask chosen to gain Ezra's and Kanan's trust long enough to reach the holocron seated deep within the temple. At the same time, the Empire had sent inquisitors to Malachor to search for the Sith holocron. Inquisitors were Vader's covert Jedi hunters who carried double-bladed spinning sabers and specialized in tracking survivors of Order 66. 3 converged on the temple. The 5th brother, a heavy brute force fighter. The 7th sister, a Mirialan strategist who used probe droids to corner prey. And the 8th brother, an acrobatic Tyrellian who used his spinning blade to vault and glide. Maul and Ezra clashed with the Inquisitors. Maul cut down the 5th brother and the 7th sister. The 8th brother tried to escape using his rotor saber, failed, and fell to his death in the chaos. With the hunters gone, Maul turned on his temporary allies. He slashed Kanan Jarrus across the eyes, blinding him, and moved to activate the temple's superweapon by seating the holocron in the obelisk at its peak, intending to wield the site as leverage against the Sith who ruled the era. Blinded but centered, Kanan adapted and helped Ezra to pull the holocron free, collapsing the activation sequence. As a consequence, the Sith temple started collapsing, forcing Maul to fly away into space on a TIE fighter. He was alive, empty-handed, and now convinced that brute force was not enough. He needed a different kind of key, one hidden in visions and knowledge, to strike the Sith. Maul did not leave Malachor with the Sith holocron. Ezra did. Later, Kanan seized that Sith holocron from Ezra for safekeeping. In addition, Kanan was in possession of a separate Jedi holocron he had kept since earlier missions. When a Jedi and a Sith holocron were opened together in the same place and time, a holocron fusion, the 2 devices could merge and answer a question posed by their users. The practice was rare because it demanded cooperation between light and dark. But Maul believed it could reveal a path to his deepest goals. To force a holocron fusion, Maul kidnapped Ezra's closest allies, the crew of the freighter Ghost, and holding them as hostages to demand a holocron trade. The captives were Hera Syndulla, a Twi'lek pilot and the Ghost's captain, Sabine Wren, a young Mandalorian artist-turned-demolition expert, Garazeb Zeb Aurelios, a Lasat brawler and former honor guard, and C-110P Chopper, their irritable astromech. With Hera, Sabine, Zeb, and Chopper in his grip, Maul forced Ezra Bridger and his mentor Kanan Jarrus to bring a Jedi holocron to pair with Maul's Sith holocron, setting up the rare holocron fusion that would point them both towards their next step. During their fusion, Ezra sought a way to destroy the Sith. Maul sought hope for himself. Both received a cryptic result, a shared vision that pointed to twin suns. Kanan broke the union before either could harvest all the knowledge, damaging the holocrons and scattering the partners again. But the image stayed with Maul like a compass that only he could read. The vision gnawed at him until he forced its meaning into focus. He stalked Ezra to Dathomir, where he used Nightsister magic to merge minds and memories at an altar, completing the half-answers left by the holocrons. The rite showed 2 things plainly. Obi-Wan Kenobi still lived, and the twin suns meant Tatooine. The cost of that magic was immediate. Spirits of the fallen coven tried to claim living vessels, but the important transfer was complete. Maul now had a destination and a name, tied tightly to the same vow that had carried him out of the waste on Lotho Minor. In 2 BBY, Maul reached Tatooine and wandered its deserts, knowing his quarry hid somewhere on a planet the size of continents and dunes. He used the same method that had drawn Kenobi across light years on Mandalore. He pulled Ezra into the trap to force a reveal, that the tactic worked. Kenobi came out of hiding rather than let a boy be destroyed by a fight he could not win. What followed was not a long duel, but a test of reading and memory. Maul opened with the same killing pattern he had used against Qui-Gon Jinn decades earlier. Kenobi, older and narrower in motion, anticipated the line and cut once, ending Maul cleanly in the desert. The date fixed his death in the record E. 2 BBY, long after most believed him slain, and ended a chase that had begun under Naboo's spires. The last notes of Maul's life were quiet. In defeat, he recognized that Kenobi guarded a greater hope on that world. The twin suns had been a sign of that hope, rather than a simple map for revenge. He died believing that the shape of destiny would answer the wrongs that had defined him. The body burned on a small pyre as the desert wind leveled the embers, leaving almost nothing behind but the line of choices that had carried him to that place. His legacy spread through several layers of the era he scarred. On Mandalore, the wound he carved opened politics that would not close for years, reshaping who held the Darksaber and what it meant to lead. In the underworld, the structures he built, the Shadow Collective and later Crimson Dawn, taught syndicates that a hidden hand could knit rivals into a moving front when fear and profit aligned. In the Force, his arc traced a harded line, a child turned into a tool, a survivor who mistook vengeance for purpose, and finally a seeker who, at the edge, could name a truth larger than himself. That last change did not erase what he had done. It did, however, mark an end that made sense for a life bent around a single vow. The galaxy turned, as it always did, but the echoes of his choices lingered in the armor he once wore, the blades he once held, and the worlds that remembered how close his hunger had come to ruling them.